Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Bold and beautiful today. I'll never forgive you didn't just erupt from Sheila's lips, they were a seismic detonation within the fragile architecture of her being, a primal shriek torn from a place so deep and raw it bypassed conscious thought and lunged straight for the exposed nerve endings of a lifetime's accumulated pain, betrayal, and desperate, clawing hope that Steffi's utterance had just annihilated. It wasn't merely a declaration, it was a sentence of eternal exile, a slamming shut of the heaviest door Sheila had spent agonizing years, through storms of her own making and desperate attempts at reformation, trying to pry even the faintest crack open. The sheer, brutal finality of never hung in the air like poison gas, heavier than the humid tension that had been building between them, a word that didn't just reject the present plea but extinguished any flickering possibility of future redemption, rendering every past struggle, every tear shed in remorse, every whispered prayer for acceptance, instantly, irrevocably meaningless. This never wasn't a temporal marker, it was an executioner's axe falling on the fragile seedling of reconciliation Sheila had dared to nurture against all odds, nurtured perhaps more fervently because Steffi's forgiveness represented the most elusive, the most precious, the most validating prize imaginable, the absolution of the one whose judgment cut deepest, whose wounds mirrored Sheila's own capacity for destruction. Steffi's pronouncement, likely delivered with that lethal cocktail of icy precision and righteous fury she wielded so effectively, wasn't just a rejection of an apology or a dismissal of an argument, it was a deliberate, surgical strike at the very core of Sheila's most profound, albeit twisted, yearning, the yearning to be seen not as the monstrous caricature the world painted, but as someone capable of change, worthy of love, or at the very least, worthy of cessation of the relentless hatred. Steffi, embodying the collective condemnation Sheila both feared and raged against, had crystallized that universal rejection into three devastating words, wielding them not as a shield, but as a spear aimed directly at the pulsing, vulnerable heart of Sheila's deepest insecurity. And in the echoing silence that followed her own desperate, guttural scream, a sound less of anger now than of absolute, soul-rending terror at the permanence settling over her, Sheila stood frozen, a statue carved from purest anguish. The defiance that usually armored her, the manipulative cunning, the explosive rage that could level rooms, all dissolved in the face of this absolute negation. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, locked onto Steffi's, searching frantically for any chink in the armor of that pronouncement, any flicker of hesitation, any microscopic hint that never might possess an infinitesimal loophole. But finding only the hardened resolve, the implacable fortress of Steffi's conviction, the terrifying certainty that this was the end of the line, the final verdict on Sheila Carter's existence in Steffi Forrester's world, was the trigger that broke the dam. It wasn't a gradual welling, it was an instantaneous, catastrophic collapse. A violent tremor racked her frame, starting deep within her chest, a convulsive shudder that traveled outwards like a shockwave. Her breath hitched, a ragged, broken sound that seemed to snag on the shards of her shattered hope. Then came the tears. Not the delicate, maidenly tears of cinematic sorrow, but a torrential downpour of pure, unadulterated devastation. They burst forth with such force they seemed to blur her vision instantly, great hot streams that carved paths through her makeup like acid rain on stone, streaking coal and foundation into grotesque, tragic masks. Her shoulders hunched forward, collapsing inwards as if physically absorbing the weight of that never, her entire posture folding like paper under the unbearable pressure. Sobs tore from her throat, harsh, guttural, animalistic sounds that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with the visceral agony of a spirit being flayed alive. Each gasp for air was a desperate, ragged struggle, punctuated by whimpers that spoke of a pain too profound for coherent expression. Her hands, usually instruments of calculated gesture or clenched fury, flew to her face, not in a dainty attempt to hide, but clawing. Pressing hard against her eyes as if trying to physically push the anguish, the image of Steffi's unforgiving face, the echoing sound of her own doomed plea, back inside, back into the void from which it had erupted. The knuckles whitened with the intensity of the pressure, a futile attempt to contain the inner explosion. Her body swayed slightly, unmoored, adrift in a sudden sea of utter desolation. The tears flowed unchecked, dripping from her chin, soaking the collar of her blouse, a physical manifestation of the internal deluge drowning her. This was grief in its most primal, most undefended form, the grief not just for a lost moment, but for a lost future, for the death of the fragile dream that had somehow, against all reason and history, taken root within her. Steffi's words hadn't just wounded her, they had performed an existential amputation, severing the last, frayed connection to the possibility of belonging, of being anything other than the pariah she was condemned to be. In that torrent of tears, Sheila wasn't the feared manipulator, the dangerous rival, or the cunning survivor. She was reduced to pure, exposed nerve ending, a raw wound weeping the bitter salt of ultimate rejection. The carefully constructed persona, the layers of defense and aggression meticulously built over decades of conflict and survival, were washed away in that flood, leaving only the trembling, broken core of a woman confronting the abyss of her own irredeemability, as reflected in the unforgiving eyes of the one person whose forgiveness she had, against all logic, craved most desperately. The sound of her weeping filled the space, a raw, ugly, profoundly human sound that stripped away the mythology of Sheila the monster and revealed, terrifyingly, the shattered human being beneath, drowning in the ocean of Steffi's irrevocable never. Every ragged inhalation was a gasp for a life raft that didn't exist, every choked exhalation expelled another fragment of hope. The physicality of her breakdown was overwhelming, the tremors that made her legs threaten to buckle, the way she wrapped her arms around herself in a pitiful, instinctive gesture of self-comfort that offered none, the slight rocking motion born of unbearable pain. Her face, contorted beyond recognition by the sheer force of her sorrow, was a landscape of ruin, puffy, reddened eyes squeezed shut against a reality too harsh to bear, mouth twisted in a silent scream beneath the audible sobs, skin blotchy and slick. It was the face of absolute surrender to despair, a visual symphony of profound loss. Steffi's words hadn't merely been heard, they had been absorbed, metabolized into a poison that was now coursing through Sheila's veins, paralyzing her defenses and leaving only this raw, humiliating vulnerability on display. The "I'll never forgive you" echoed not just in the room, but in the cavernous emptiness opening up inside Sheila, confirming her deepest, most secret fear, that she was fundamentally, inherently unforgivable, a permanent stain, a creature beyond the pale of human compassion, especially from this woman who represented the life, the family, the normalcy she had forever vandalized and forever coveted. This weeping wasn't just for Steffi's withheld grace, it was the agonized mourning for the final death of the illusion that Sheila Carter could ever be anything else, the devastating acceptance that monster wasn't just a label applied by others, but her inescapable, irrevocable nature, cemented by the one verdict that truly mattered. The tears were the baptismal waters of her eternal damnation, flowing from eyes forced wide open to a truth too brutal to bear. Who was not able to withstand Luna's madness? Everything went wrong. This time, Luna Nozawa truly succeeded. When she eventually took aim, she never even managed to get a shot in because she was waving the pistol around like it was a toy. People continued to lunge for her pistol instead. Sheila Carter was shot in the foot after attempting to tackle her own granddaughter. She still has 9 toes, at least. Luna didn't even give a damn. Liam Spencer, who also went for her gun when he came in, was shot. Taking aim, he shot Luna as he went for it once more. At University Hospital, 3 persons underwent surgery, but one of them did not make it out alive. It's likely that Sheila will survive because she was only shot in the foot. However, Liam is in the most vulnerable state. The real story of Liam. A harsh conclusion about Liam is made as the surgery goes on and catastrophe strikes. He was a hero, prepared to go to any lengths to save Steffi Forrester Finnegan. Liam was going out with a bang since he felt like he was dead anyway. However, when he flipped back and forth between Steffi and Hope Logan over the years, his entire life suddenly flashed before him, reminding him of all the dreadful things he had done to both of them. Liam's cancer may not have killed him after all if he is indeed deceased. Since Dollar Bill is the one who believed Luna had changed and had her released from prison, that will give him a lot to think about. None of this would have occurred if he hadn't taken that action. Bill made such a mess. It was all for nothing and lost additional lives. When Bill finds out that Luna shot his son, he goes rogue. Forrester, Steffi. Bill wanted to think Luna deserves a second chance because she had a difficult upbringing. Her narrative resonated with him. But Luna took advantage of his generosity to intensify her feud with Steffi. Bill is called by the hospital to see his son. According to teasers for The Bold and the Beautiful, Bill gets a call from the hospital informing him that Liam Spencer was wounded and was in critical condition. Bill heads straight to the hospital, where he meets up with Steffi, Ridge Forrester, and maybe John Finnegan in the waiting area. Bill finds out that Luna fired the gun at Liam after shooting Sheila Carter in the foot. He is told by Steffi that Liam shot Luna to keep her safe from that crazy lunatic. Bill is unsure about his thoughts on the matter. He feels obligated to advocate for her release. According to B&B spoilers, Steffi and Ridge don't believe he should be there. Liam may not want to see his father, according to Steffi. Bill, however, doesn't give a damn about their opinions or desires. His kid is undergoing surgery, and he won't leave until he is certain he will survive. Bill deviates from the rules. The Luna scenario makes Bill distance himself from his family, as he frequently does. Bill becomes even more enraged when teasers for The Bold and the Beautiful indicate that Luna won't survive her gunshot wound. He caused this whole scenario by having Luna released from prison. Bill will be on a warpath if Luna survives. Targeting Steffi and those two men was one thing, but his family was quite another. It won't occur again. Liam might not make it through his injuries. As Bill struggles with his guilt and plans retaliation against Luna, that would provide a compelling plot point. Additionally, Dollar Bill will find out that his son has been diagnosed with a brain tumor. For him it will be a double whammy. According to previews for The Bold and the Beautiful, Bill will move to protect his family from Luna's clutches no matter what happens or who makes it through Luna's outburst. Hospital surgical suite cut through the lingering haze of gunpowder and desperation that had clung to the air just hours before, a brutal counterpoint to the chaotic violence unleashed by Luna Nozawa's shattered psyche. 3 lives hung suspended on the precipice, tethered by 4 lines, and the relentless, skilled urgency of the surgical teams fighting against time and trauma, yet beneath the focused silence broken only by the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the hushed, technical commands, an undeniable truth pulsed with grim certainty. Sheila Carter, despite her agonizing foot wound and the grotesque absence of one toe, was fundamentally stable, her vitals strong, her recovery a matter of painful convalescence rather than mortal peril. Luna Nozawa herself, the architect of this nightmare whose descent into madness had manifested in the terrifying, erratic brandishing of a weapon she wielded with terrifying indifference, was gravely wounded from Liam Spencer's desperate return fire. Her body riddled with damage requiring extensive reconstruction, her survival uncertain but her immediate threat neutralized under sedation and surgical intervention. And then there was Liam Spencer, the man who had burst into the maelstrom not as a calculated savior, but as a desperate, dying man seeking a final, redemptive act, a man now lying on the coldest table, his chest cracked open, his lifeblood spilling into suction canisters as skilled hands battled the catastrophic damage inflicted by Luna's bullet tearing through vital organs, a battle growing increasingly futile with every passing, agonizing minute. The frantic energy in his operating room held a different quality, a grim, anticipatory tension. The bullet hadn't merely pierced, it had ravaged, shredding tissue, severing vessels feeding life itself. Surgeons exchanged glances over their masks, a silent language communicating the dwindling odds. Transfusions struggled to keep pace with the internal bleeding. Vital signs, once fluctuating wildly, began a slow, inexorable decline. It wasn't just the physical destruction, it was the sheer exhaustion of a body already waging a silent, losing war against the insidious invasion of cancer, a body pushed beyond its final reserves of resilience. As the lead surgeon finally met the eyes of the assisting team, a profound, heavy silence descended, thicker than the sterile drapes. A slow, deliberate shake of the head. The relentless, demanding shriek of the flatline monitor tore through the tense quiet, not as a surprise, but as the crushing confirmation of what everyone had felt unfolding. Liam Spencer was gone. The hero who lunged for the gun, who absorbed the bullet meant perhaps for another, whose final conscious act was to stop Luna's rampage even as his own life force ebbed away, would not walk out of these doors. His sacrifice was absolute, his penance paid in full, not to the disease he feared, but to the sudden, violent consequence of another's unraveling mind. In that moment of sterile, technological pronouncement of death, Liam's life didn't just end, it flashed, a visceral, overwhelming torrent of fragmented images and searing emotions that flooded his fading consciousness in those final seconds before the darkness claimed him completely. He saw Steffi Forrester Finnegan, not as she was now, but bathed in the golden light of their early, seemingly unshakable love, her fierce spirit a beacon he'd vowed to protect. Then the image fractured, replaced by the devastating hurt in her eyes as he walked away, time and again, drawn by the siren song of Hope Logan's perceived stability and gentle understanding. Hope's face materialized next, soft and trusting, then contorted with betrayal as he inevitably returned to Steffi, her quiet strength crumbling under the weight of his indecision. He saw the wedding days, both of them, moments of pure joy instantly shadowed by the knowledge of the pain he would inevitably cause. He remembered the desperate pleas, the slammed doors, the tears he dismissed as temporary, the justifications he crafted so skillfully to appease his own conscience while shattering theirs. It's complicated, I need to figure things out, I love you both, but differently. The lies he told himself echoed louder now than any monitor, a cacophony of selfishness masquerading as noble confusion. The bouncing, the indecision, the emotional whiplash he inflicted, it wasn't just love, it was a profound, corrosive failure. He failed Steffi by never fully committing, by always leaving a door open. He failed Hope by never truly closing the door behind him. He failed them both by making them casualties in the endless war within his own restless heart. The cancer diagnosis had felt like a cosmic sentence, a final, brutal punctuation mark on a life he suddenly saw as a tapestry woven with threads of betrayal. Facing death, he'd resolved to meet it not as a victim, but as a redeemer. Saving Steffi from Luna's madness would be his final, unambiguous act of love, his atonement. The bitter, devastating irony now was crushing. The cancer, the disease he believed would claim him, hadn't been the executioner. His death came instead in a burst of violence born from another's insanity, a consequence triggered by a decision utterly beyond his control. He hadn't been taken by the silent cells multiplying within. He'd been felled by a bullet fired in a moment of chaos he walked into deliberately, fulfilling his wish to go out with a bang, but leaving behind only a deeper, more devastating silence. And the weight of that consequence, the horrifying chain reaction ignited by a single, catastrophic error in judgment, settled like a suffocating pall over the hushed hospital corridor where William Bill Spencer stood, a granite statue of dawning horror. The news of Liam's death, delivered in the clipped, professional tones of a trauma surgeon, didn't register immediately, it detonated. Bill, the titan of finance who bent the world to his will, who saw manipulation as strategy and control as destiny, was brought low by a single, irrevocable fact: he had done this. His arrogance, his unshakable belief in his own perception and power, had been the spark. Luna Nozawa, simmering with instability, a loaded weapon in human form, was behind bars. Contained. Neutralized. But Bill Spencer, looking at her through the distorted lens of his own needs and perhaps a twisted sense of paternal obligation, or merely a gambler's miscalculation, had seen not danger, but potential, or perhaps just saw change where there was only fragile camouflage over a fault line. He pulled strings, exerted pressure, wielded his considerable influence like a blunt instrument, and secured her release. He declared her rehabilitated, safe. He overrode the warnings, the institutional assessments, the simple, terrifying reality of her recent actions. He played God with lives that weren't his to gamble. And Luna, unleashed by his decree, had promptly spiraled into the madness that culminated in the gun, the struggle, Sheila's wound, and Liam's fatal intervention. Liam's blood, soaking into the floor, was on Bill's hands as surely as if he'd pulled the trigger himself. The son he had manipulated, berated, loved fiercely in his own domineering way, and ultimately failed to protect, was dead. Not because of his illness, but because Bill, in his infinite hubris, had handed the instrument of his destruction, a volatile, armed Luna, her freedom on a silver platter. The mess Bill made wasn't just administrative or legal, it was a chasm of grief and guilt, a life extinguished, a family shattered. His desperate attempt to control yet another narrative, to perhaps even save Luna in some misguided gesture, had backfired with apocalyptic finality. It cost Liam his life. It cost Steffi the father of her child, however flawed. It cost Hope a complex, painful chapter finally closed in the worst possible way. It cost Bill his son. And for what? What grand design, what strategic victory, could possibly justify this? The answer echoed in the hollow silence of the waiting room, in the relentless, accusing flatline now etched permanently in Bill's mind: nothing. It was all for absolutely, devastatingly, irredeemably nothing. Luna's insanity was the powder keg, but Bill Spencer, convinced of his own infallibility, struck the match. And Liam Spencer, seeking redemption in his final moments, became the tragic, sacrificial flame consumed by the inferno his father recklessly ignited. The survivor of a terminal diagnosis ultimately fell not to disease, but to the collateral damage of unchecked power and a father's fatal misjudgment. Sheila Carter still has 9 toes. Bill Spencer is left with a gaping, inconsolable void where his son once stood, and the crushing, eternal burden of knowing he unlocked the door to the madness that killed him.